July 10th, 2024, inside South Carolina's J. Reuben Long Detention Center. The atmosphere felt wrong long before the violence began. The air was heavy, thick, charged with something no one could name, but everyone could feel. 4 inmates sat at a metal table in the crowded dining hall. No words, no laughter. Just the sound of trays clanking and distant echoes bouncing off concrete walls. Eyes darted from corner to corner. Muscles tense, nerves stretched thin. This was the kind of silence that doesn't calm a room, it warns it. Then, without warning, everything snapped. Collins Bates suddenly stood up and slammed his food tray straight into Antonio Hampton. The impact was violent, explosive. In that single moment, the fragile balance holding the room together shattered completely. Chaos erupted. Inmates jumped to their feet. Chairs scraped violently across the floor. Fists started flying as panic spread through the room like wildfire. What began as a single strike turned into a full-scale brawl in seconds. There was no time to think, no time to react, only instinct. As officers rushed in, the situation spiraled out of control. In the confusion, a taser was deployed. Electricity ripped through 2 bodies at once. One of them collapsed instantly, his head smashing into the unforgiving concrete floor. That impact would change everything. 19-year-old Chance Benson never stood back up the same again. In a matter of seconds, Benson was left paralyzed from the chest down. A young life permanently altered by a moment of chaos inside a place already designed to strip people of control. Doctors would later confirm the damage was catastrophic. The consequences were irreversible. One brief fight, one instant of violence, a lifetime of suffering. This wasn't just another jailhouse scuffle. It was a stark reminder of how quickly prison violence can cross a line no one can walk back from. A reminder that behind bars, everything can change in the blink of an eye. And this was only the beginning. Because what happened next would make this incident look tame by comparison. These are 5 of the most brutal prison fights ever caught on camera. February 11th, 2016, Monterrey, Mexico. As night fell over the city, sirens pierced the air around Topo Chico prison. Thick smoke rose into the sky, visible from miles away. Inside the walls, hell had already broken loose. 2 rival factions of the Zetas cartel had launched a full-scale war for control of the prison. By the time the violence ended, 49 inmates would be dead. The riot erupted shortly before midnight, sparked by a power struggle between 2 long-standing enemies. One side was led by Juan Pedro de Var Farias, known as Z27. The other followed Jorge Ivan Hernandez Canta, a powerful figure tied to the Gulf Cartel. What followed was not a fight, it was a massacre. Inmates armed themselves with hammers, clubs, and makeshift blades. The narrow hallways became killing zones. Bodies were beaten, hacked, burned. Governor Jaime Rodriguez later described the scene with a single word: bloodbath. Investigators recovered at least 60 hammers, 86 knives, and over 120 improvised weapons. Many victims were so badly mutilated that identifying them would take days. And yet, despite the chaos, no one escaped. Outside the prison walls, families gathered in desperation. Some screamed for answers. Others hurled rocks and sticks at the gates, trying to force their way inside. Riot police formed a tight perimeter as tension mounted with every passing minute. Topo Chico was already notorious. It's built for just over 3,000 inmates. It housed more than 4,600. Many were awaiting trial for minor offenses, trapped inside with hardened cartel enforcers. The prison wasn't controlled by guards. It was controlled by gangs. The Zetas and Gulf Cartel ran everything, extorting families, controlling contraband, deciding who lived comfortably and who didn't live at all. Guards were underpaid, understaffed, and often complicit. On the night of February 11th, their lack of control allowed violence on a scale never seen before. The riot lasted roughly 40 minutes. In that time, inmates set fires that sent smoke pouring into the night sky. Flames lit up the prison from the inside out. When authorities finally regained control, the toll was staggering. 49 dead, 12 injured, all male inmates. Governor Rodriguez didn't sugarcoat the truth. He admitted the prison system itself had created the conditions for the massacre. Prisoners ruled Topo Chico. Corruption was embedded deep into the walls. Troops flooded the facility. Heavily armed police searched cell by cell. Families waited outside, praying their loved ones were still alive. For many, this tragedy felt horrifyingly familiar. Just 4 years earlier, 44 inmates had died in another nearby prison riot. Topo Chico wasn't an isolated failure. It was proof that the system was broken. And as the smoke cleared, one reality became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a riot, it was a warning. But if you think Topo Chico was brutal, wait until you see what happened next. The talking heads changed. The officials rotated. Press conferences were held. Statements were issued. But the reality inside Rikers Island never changed. Attorney Ilya Novosov summed it up bluntly. The people at the top got shuffled around, but the system itself stayed exactly the same. New York City's Department of Corrections insisted they were fully committed to creating a safer and more humane environment. On paper, it sounded reassuring. In reality, those words rang hollow against the constant backdrop of blood, violence, and fear. The Correction Officers Benevolent Association pushed back with a very different narrative. They described Rikers as an impossible environment, one where officers are stretched beyond limits every single day. We are operating in an impossible environment and deserve more credit for the lives we protect and save daily, their statement read. But for the inmates trapped inside the cycle of so-called fight nights, those words offered little comfort. Because the consequences of unchecked violence were impossible to ignore. At least 16 inmate deaths were recorded at Rikers Island in a single year. 16 lives lost inside one facility. Each death sparked outrage, protests, and renewed calls for reform. Yet as case after case surfaced, a disturbing truth became clear. Rikers wasn't broken because of a few rogue officers. It wasn't failing because of isolated incidents. It was collapsing from the inside out. City leaders promised progress, and Mayor Eric Adams publicly expressed confidence in new leadership. Jail Commissioner Louis Molina assured the public that staffing levels would increase and that Rikers would be transformed into a more humane facility. But for those living inside its walls, change felt like a distant rumor. One Manhattan judge saw the danger firsthand. After reviewing surveillance footage and listening to testimony, the judge ruled that it wasn't safe for one defendant to remain at Rikers Island. Instead, the man was allowed to await trial from home, a rare escape from the violence that swallowed so many others whole. That single decision spoke volumes. Fight night at Rikers wasn't just about inmates attacking inmates. It was the symptom of a system where authority figures either participated in the brutality or quietly looked the other way. A place where survival often meant fighting or becoming prey. As the cameras pulled back from the blood-soaked cells and crowded corridors, the true cost became undeniable. Not just broken bodies, but broken trust. A broken institution. And while a lucky few managed to escape its grip, for most, Rikers Island remained a battleground, where the fights were never fair and the consequences were always brutal. But if you think Rikers fight nights were the peak of prison violence, wait until you see what happened next. January 8, 2024, Chicago, Illinois. Inside the infamous Cook County Jail, chaos erupted without warning. A violent prison brawl exploded inside one of America's largest jail facilities, leaving 5 inmates stabbed and several others injured. What guards discovered afterward was even more disturbing: homemade weapons crafted from everyday medical inhalers. This wasn't a random fight. It was planned. Cook County Jail houses thousands of inmates, many tied to Chicago's most dangerous street gangs. For weeks, tensions had been building beneath the surface. Guards noticed subtle warning signs, increased hostility, minor altercations, quiet stares exchanged across recreation yards, but nothing prepared them for what unfolded that morning. Inmates from rival gangs were placed in adjacent recreation areas. Surveillance footage later revealed subtle hand signals, silent communication coordinating the attack. Then, in an instant, the signal was given. Chaos erupted. Inmates lunged forward, armed with makeshift knives fashioned from inhalers and other common objects. The assault was fast, precise, and ruthless. Within seconds, 5 men were brutally stabbed. The attack wasn't meant to start a riot. It was meant to send a message. Guards rushed in, but by the time they intervened, the damage was already done. Blood stained the concrete floor as medics worked frantically to treat the wounded. Even more alarming, the attackers had concealed their weapons so effectively that initial searches failed to uncover them. A chilling display of inmate ingenuity. The aftermath was swift and severe. The entire facility was placed on lockdown. Guards searched every cell, every corridor, every common area. Dozens of homemade shanks were recovered, crafted from toothbrushes, broken utensils, and pieces of metal ripped from air vents. Key instigators were pulled from the general population and placed in solitary confinement. The victims survived, but the message had already been delivered outside the jail. The criminal underworld took notice. Threats of retaliation began circulating almost immediately. Jail officials scrambled to prevent the violence from escalating into a full-scale gang war inside the facility. Security measures were tightened. Surveillance was increased. Surprise cell searches became routine. Even medical items weren't safe anymore. Inhalers once considered harmless were now classified as a major security risk. The investigation revealed the attack had been weeks in the making. Inmates communicated through coded messages, hand signals, and notes passed during mealtimes. They exploited predictable routines and security gaps to execute their plan with precision. The January 8th brawl forced Chicago officials to rethink jail security from the ground up. New protocols were introduced. Gang monitoring intensified. Contraband screening became stricter than ever. But the violence didn't disappear. Gang rivalries run deep, and inmates continue to find new ways to turn ordinary objects into deadly weapons. Cook County Jail remains a pressure cooker, where one spark can ignite chaos at any moment. The attack served as a brutal reminder. Even modern facilities with advanced surveillance are never truly in control. And if you think Cook County was bad, wait until you see what happened next, when homemade weapons turned a routine cell check into a full-blown bloodbath. May 14th, Arizona State Prison Complex, Tucson. What unfolded that day would expose deep cracks in the foundation of Arizona's prison system, and it was all caught on camera. The footage opens on a chilling detail. No guards in sight. Two inmates move slowly across the prison yard, padlocks tied to makeshift tethers dangling from their hands. They stalk their target with purpose. No shouting, no hesitation, just calm, deliberate movement. The victim is already bleeding. He stumbles, trying desperately to create distance, but the attackers close in. Each swing of the padlocks carries the potential to kill. Metal slams into flesh again and again. The attack stretches on for nearly 3 minutes, 3 minutes of unchecked violence. And still, no staff intervene. Only when the assault spills into the open recreation area does help finally arrive. By then, the damage is done. Donna Ham, director of Middle Ground Prison Reform, later described the footage as disturbing and illegal. Under normal circumstances, incidents like this never make it beyond prison walls. But this time, a contraband cell phone captured everything. What should have remained hidden became undeniable evidence. The video immediately ignited calls for urgent reform and raised terrifying questions about safety inside. Arizona's prisons. Officials from the Arizona Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation, and Reentry responded with carefully chosen words, calling the attack an isolated incident and insisting no serious injuries occurred. But the footage told a very different story. All inmates involved were moved to higher custody housing, yet concerns about staffing shortages and massive security gaps exploded into the public spotlight. This wasn't an anomaly. Just weeks earlier, 3 inmates had been murdered at the same complex in a separate attack. A pattern was forming and it was impossible to ignore. Prison reform advocates pointed to chronic understaffing as the root cause. Too few officers were responsible for too many areas. Basic security procedures were breaking down. Cells weren't being checked. Inmates weren't being searched. Carlos Garcia, executive director of the Arizona Correctional Peace Officers Association, put it bluntly. If you have one officer responding to an assault, that means nobody is watching the yard. They're running, trying to keep up with the workload. The attack also exposed how easily everyday items could become deadly weapons. Padlocks meant to secure personal property were transformed into tools of near-fatal violence. The video showed how long attackers could operate freely when staff presence was lacking. Despite official claims that the incident was isolated, more footage began to surface. Inmates weren't just recording assaults, they were posting them online. TikTok-style clips, Facebook uploads, a steady stream of violence that prison officials could no longer deny or contain. A DCR director, Ryan Thornell, acknowledged the problem, stating he was proud of the staff's response. But But reform advocates weren't convinced. To them, the footage revealed a system in crisis. The attack triggered an internal criminal investigation and forced statewide conversations about prison security. Governor Hobbs' office responded by proposing pay raises for correctional officers, an attempt to address the staffing shortages that allowed such violence to flourish. Investigators detailed how incident command protocols were activated and how dangerous items were confiscated. But for many watching the footage, the truth was already clear. This wasn't just one incident, it was a symptom. The most disturbing part wasn't the brutality, was how normalized it had become. Reform advocates warned the video represented only a tiny fraction of the violence happening 24/7 behind prison walls. Security protocols were adjusted. Inmates were moved. Contraband cell phones became a top priority. Staff schedules were reshuffled, but the core problem remained unchanged. Chronic understaffing, inadequate supervision, systems stretched to the breaking point. The padlock attack became a symbol of everything broken inside Arizona's correctional system, a wake-up call that could no longer be ignored. And yet what happened next would prove that danger wasn't confined to one state. July 10, 2024. J. Rubin Long Detention Center, Horry County, South Carolina. For inmates sit in a crowded dining hall, Collins Bates, Chance Benson, Jose Rodriguez, and Antonio Hampton. The tension is palpable. No one speaks. The room hums with unease. Then it happens. Bates suddenly swings his tray into Hampton, shattering the fragile calm. The fight erupts instantly. Inmates scramble. Fists fly. Chaos engulfs the room. Rodriguez grabs 19-year-old Chance Benson in a headlock and drags him across the floor. Officers rush in, desperate to regain control. A taser is deployed. The electrical charge hits Rodriguez, but Benson is still locked in his grasp. Both men collapse. Benson's head slams into the concrete. Witnesses later say it all happened in seconds. But the consequences would last forever. Chance Benson is left paralyzed from the chest down. His attorney, David Wrigley, describes the aftermath as devastating. Benson struggles with the most basic tasks. He can't feed himself. He's fighting to regain even the smallest movement. Medical teams respond. Officers secure the area. But the damage cannot be undone. The first riot of the year at J. Rubin Long Detention Center has already claimed its victim. 15th Circuit Solicitor Jimmy Richardson attempts to contextualize the incident. It's not a crowded church, he says. It's a crowded jail. But those words offer little comfort to Benson or his family. Charges are filed. Everyone except Rodriguez faces an additional count of participating in a riot. Rodriguez is charged with third-degree assault. Facility Director Marcus Rhodes calls it an isolated incident. But inside the jail, the scars remain. Security tightens. New protocols are introduced. Yet the memory of that day lingers. Benson's recovery is slow, painful, uncertain. His case sparks debate over the use of tasers in correctional facilities and whether more could have been done to prevent such a tragic outcome. As the dust settles, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Inside America's prisons, violence doesn't build gradually. It explodes. In an instant, lives are changed forever, and sometimes the cost is far greater than anyone could have imagined.